Coming up, while there were plenty of takeaways from the first preseason game for the Brooklyn Nets, we did not learn about Nic Claxton or Trendon Watford. What are the pieces that were not on the floor in that first game that need to showcase themselves to give us a clearer picture of how this rotation cracks going into the regular season? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, with the next preseason game not coming until next week, there still is plenty of time and plenty of reasons to look back at this Clippers game and talk about the guys that were not on the floor: Nic Claxton, Trendon Watford, maybe even Killian Hayes again here a little bit as we think about how all these pieces are going to fit together.
Yeah, it's a bummer. We got to wait basically a whole week in between these games. And it's, because on some level, if you're following the NBA right now, it almost feels like a regular NBA schedule, right? Like you're getting games every single night. Most teams are trotting out their starters. Most teams are giving you a clear look of like probably what at least their first rotations are going to be barring injury. And so it is like a really cool time in the NBA. And then, Nets, just because, no one runs worse. No one runs worse than this team. You got a 10:30 game again that you just can't even watch the very beginning of because NBA League Pass hits the skids. And then you got to wait a whole week where they get back from the West Coast and they can go into play the Wizards. Ooh, a fellow tank off team that we could be spiraling toward the bottom with. But it's almost a bummer that we have to look at this game as, to some degree, as things that didn't happen, and therefore trying to figure out like what will happen with these guys who are going to be, you would think, key components to the team: Claxton, Watford, Daron Sharp, and we kind of hope Killian Hayes too, because I think we're all like holding out hope that there's something there left over from that draft class when he was drafted really high. So we'll try to make sense of it, but the absence of those, at least two of those guys, and probably three, does kind of skew sort of what happened in this preseason game and make it a little hard to discern exactly what maybe the team plan is going into this year.
Yeah, it was interesting because when we talked about the starting rotation for the first preseason game, so obviously it's Schroeder, it's Thomas, it's Johnson, it's Dorian Finney-Smith, and then you end up getting Ben Simmons in there. Now, pretty easy to go ahead and flip it over and say, well, you're going to put Nic Claxton into that starting unit, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Is it going to be Ben Simmons out there with Nic Claxton? And even at that point, you'd say, so Dorian Finney-Smith comes off the court. And then it actually brings up the interesting thing that we mentioned. Jalen Wilson, clearly one of the first guys off the bench. That's really positive. But now you put a veteran into that bench unit. Now you talk about, who comes in when and where. Not the same type of player, not the same size or measurables, but it still does create a different congestion in the bench rotation. But if we think about Nic Claxton at the highest level here.
Speaking of congestion, see, sorry
to
cut you off, but what a perfect word. I actually thought you were going to use congestion in a different form, but they both apply. Keep going with Nic Claxton.
And but you think about Nic Claxton being on the floor for the Brooklyn Nets and the congestion that it's going to create if you insist on having Ben Simmons be a part of that unit. We heard Jordi Fernandez say this in the offseason, how, we'll be willing to try that. We know last year the sample size was bad, but there's other samples where it looks good. Those were usually samples when you had Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving or James Harden on the floor. Turns out that makes everybody look better. I will say, as of today, October 10th, I do come in with some trepidation around the idea that you are going to be forced to watch Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton share the floor based off a very small 13-minute sample size for Simmons. But my one biggest concern here is that Nic Claxton doesn't look like he's playing at his highest possible level because of the problems you create specifically on the offensive end with those two players.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of things. One, I'm just going to be very blunt. And actually, I was against this.
You were already pretty blunt the first time we talked about it, but be even more blunt this time, Doug.
They shouldn't do it. They shouldn't do it because, okay, you should do it if the idea is, hey, we're tanking anyway and legit, who cares? Okay, which I'm still as everyone that listens to the podcast knows, that is a sort of like a company line for me at this point. Like it doesn't matter too much. When you said the sample size for Ben Simmons, you're like, yeah, 13 minutes. I'll just counter you with like the 1,500 minutes that we've seen from Ben Simmons since he got on the team as maybe the more relevant sample size, and like what happens when Claxton gets on the court. If you have to choose between the two, you should for sure choose Claxton, not close. And then if you think that like it was rough looking in this preseason game with Ben Simmons getting himself like to do anything in the paint, go stick Nic Claxton in the dunker spot and see what happens. Like it was going to be even harder. And so we just kind of already know how the story ends. I'm already reversing course on this. And everyone, hey, look, if you think I'm being too harsh on Ben Simmons, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like we've been apologetic for him at times with this, but to me, I'm just kind of completely over it. And if it does begin to, if it stops other like good basketball things from happening, even in a tanking season, I'm becoming more and more against it, I think, right? I just don't see who it helps except for egos at that point. And I'm not even sure like it would even help Claxton's ego because it makes his work harder. So I just don't want it to happen. I think I'm already trying to kind of like reversing course on this.
No, and I think, it's weird how this kind of intersects with what I had talked about previously. And I'll get to that a little bit deeper in 1 second here. Just as a reminder, Claxton did miss this first game with hamstring soreness. So the assumption is that he'll be back for the second one. But remember, like hamstrings are those kind of things that take a little bit of time to get over and to fully get through. So we may not get the next sample of what it's going to look like, even when it comes to the next game on the 14th. So there's going to be a little bit of ambiguity there when you talk about it. And then to your point, whether or not Ben Simmons, you'll say follow the money, $40 million, we get that. Well, guess what? Nicholas Claxton's $100 million man. Like, it's not like you're not talking about bringing in Day'Ron Sharp and forcing him into it, a guy in a potential contract year whose minutes were greatly reduced over the back end of last season until he wasn't really a factor at all. This is a guy that you committed money to, and at least in the short term, you believe, obviously, has a massive upside to be a part of your young core going forward and ultimately maybe the veteran of this squad in years to come, as opposed to Ben Simmons, who's on the expiring deal, who doesn't look like he has it anymore and doesn't really offer you value in a lot of other key areas. That being said, coming up here in a second, I'll actually go even a layer deeper about why it matters to play these two guys together, even if the goal is tanking and the season, quote unquote, does not make a difference. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that today, my friends, over at Gametime. You're going to the game, you're going to the theater, you're going to the comedy show, you're going to the concert, whatever it is, you're going to need tickets. You're going to want to make that process the best available deal you can get. You be able to see what you're going to see when you just sit down, and you're going to just want to make sure this is as easy as possible. This is where Gametime comes in. Gametime Picks makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. And if you're in the New York City area, I mean, there's almost too many things to choose from. You got ALDS stuff going here with the Yankees starting at 120. That's not too bad for a playoff game. This Saturday, Cincinnati Bengals at the Giants starting at $67. The boys in blue, Bills at Jets coming up there next Monday. October 14th, that's starting at $62. Concerts too. Oh my goodness, I can't even show my kid this page. I'm realizing because it's the best deals, but we're still gonna have to. It's not exactly cheap to go to these concerts. This is all the stuff you're gonna get here on Gametime. No better place to buy tickets. Like I said, you're gonna get super deals. You're gonna see the seats before you even sit down. You're gonna take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the rotation, obviously the players that were not available in preseason game number 1 and the impact it can have going forward. Want to talk about Trendon Watford because he's actually, we've done this before about a little bit of a bigger body that can handle the ball and get it out in transition, some of those things that on paper we like about Ben Simmons. But you mentioned there in the first segment about how if it's a tank season, who cares? You could throw Simmons and Claxton out there, and it doesn't really matter because the ultimate thing is we're going to be bad and we're going to get a high lottery pick. My pushback on that would be it's like, go picture Cam Thomas being on the floor. And you mentioned before about bad looks for Ben Simmons and then put Claxton in the dunker spot. What does that do to him? Well, put Claxton in the dunker spot and then put another non-shooter on the floor in Ben Simmons and put the ball in Cam Thomas's hands. Where now maybe it's not as easy for him to drive the lane and get at the basket if he wants to go that route. And the easy outlet passes that feel like, hey, make that next logical play, hot potato, move the ball. Now all of a sudden you're moving the ball to a non-shooter and then maybe to another non-shooter. And it starts to break down. We've seen this journey before. So that's the only part where we know, we both agree we're not at risk of winning too many games and spiking out of the lottery. We are at risk of damaging the development of certain players by having pieces that just don't fit. And you have
I
enough
agree with you.
guys on this roster. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No worries there. I agree with you on that. Like
Yeah.
I mean, just to be super clear, I agree. I'm saying that I'm shifting my mentality. My original mentality was sort of on the other side of that. It's like, hey, whatever, there's going to be enough minutes. I still believe that's possible, but I just don't see, it's just becoming increasingly clear that there's just nothing that's good that's going to come out of this. Like, okay, you want to play Ben Simmons? I'm just making don't play with Simmons and Claxton together. That's all I'm saying. Like, you should play Simmons. Like, Simmons can still set these shooters up. I think he's still pretty good at getting like guys like Jalen Wilson. I think he and Cam Thomas still make a relevant pairing, even at 50% of what he once was. I'm only saying on the Claxton Simmons thing. I'm not interested in seeing if that works. Here's the news flash: it's not going to work. Like, it's not going to work.
And that's to my point when we were talking about it in the offseason, and I think maybe I may have brought it up at the time, but it's just, okay, starting rotation. Well, then Ben Simmons can't be in it because I'm not going to start Nicholas Claxton.
Agreed.
Claxton starts. So now that means Ben Simmons is coming off the bench, and we just have to accept that and move on from it. And Ben Simmons needs to either get into that pocket and find the guys that he can work with, and you'll maybe bring Claxton off because we've talked about how he's never going to be a 35, 36 minute a night guy. Like, that's just not probably what he's built to do. So, okay, you'll be able to cross over Ben Simmons into the starting lineup, cross him over with Cam Thomas. We just talked about coming out of the first preseason game where when you had Simmons come off the floor, when Schroeder came off the floor, what that looked like for Thomas. So there's plenty of options here to still have it be beneficial to everybody. But yeah, the idea of, let's say that Nicholas Claxton's hamstring is ready to go for the next preseason game, there's no longer a point, even in preseason, to say, hey, let's see what happens if we put these two guys on the court. It's so non-functional that actually will be in a season that's about the future and not about the present. In the present, I will be irate if I have to watch these two guys share the floor.
Yeah, like I don't know. I think I'm probably overly. I'm irrationally frustrated by how that first preseason game looked.
Can I ask? Can we say? I know this probably isn't true because we've been very honest about how we feel about Ben Simmons and the state of his game, and also though. I wonder, is part of the frustration just like because it comes out, you're like, it's the same thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was nothing different, which re-triggers, right?
Adam and I talk about this stuff all the time. That when I feel my greatest sense of frustration is when I feel shame about my thoughts. Like that, I really only get frustrated at this point when I feel uncomfortable with my own feelings about something. And I think that's true for most humans. This frustration is frustration at myself for believing it and expecting to see something different. I'm not mad at Ben Simmons at all. Who cares? Right. It's fine. Just, I hope he does well, but I'm saying it's more my own frustration about not, fool me once, shame on however that saying goes. Yeah, that's where we are. Yeah. Fool me twice. It's just shame on me territory. Like, that's my bad for turning that game on, thinking it was going to look any different. It didn't. Okay. My fault. Like, that's okay. The frustration's only at myself. Yeah. I'm really not, it's not a Ben Simmons thing at all.
Now, the other player coming out of this, obviously, as well, in terms of ones that we've gotten sample sizes on, is Trendon Watford. And this actually does go into it. It makes it interesting to me, who he's already getting labeled. Like, he currently has the status of being labeled as a game time decision as of right now. It says he's going to miss at least 2 weeks with the left hamstring strain. So more than the soreness that Claxton has. But again, it's a full week-ish before the next preseason game. So hopefully we see him before the regular season starts, just to know that he's healthy and ready to go. He is also just a fun figure to look at. It kind of, I mentioned before, Dorian Finney-Smith, Jalen Wilson, all these bodies, the first off the bench and guys that are in the starting rotation. Trendon Watford obviously starts to then congest the bench unit that you want to come in with. Not in a bad way, but you'd be saying Jalen Wilson. We'd obviously be saying that you would have, well, now Ben Simmons coming off the bench, but then Trendon Watford would be one of the very next names that you would put into that group to come off of the bench. I'm not worried about how he fits in. He's a nice energy guy, something we always talked about the Nets needing more of. But I do like the idea of, if Cam Thomas flexes from the starting unit and stays there as a couple of guys come out, getting Trendon Watford into there offers some of that same balance that you want to have, a guy that can get out and run the floor and certainly handle the ball a little bit. We know with the ball handling deficiencies this roster currently has.
Yeah, like, he had a great end of the season, we thought. Like, played a lot of minutes, but 12, 6, and 3. And as well, 12, 6, and 2.5. over the last, 7 or 8 games of the year, shot 39% from 3, low volume, but, almost 2 attempts per game. Actually, even higher if I just track it back. He's probably more like over 40% over when like the Nets really called it and he was playing 7 minutes a game. He was like the 42, 43% from 3. Like, again, like just enough floor spacing, just enough on-ball stuff. That doesn't have the speed of Simmons, but kind of does some of the similar things. I'm all for that. Like, let's try this one. And then you can get some 3-pointers out of it too. He can shoot some of these corner threes, even a couple above the break threes. It's just such a better thing that he's another one where I really would have loved to see what happened, like where he came into this thing. Like, does he come in before Zaire Williams, who I think we can start getting a little bit excited about too. Some of the versatility there, right? Like, let's just start seeing some of this. He's one of the ones that I was really bummed when he was ruled out, because he was one where I was like, he's not going to come in above Clowney, but is he the 7th man? Is he 10th, 11th? It's going to tell us a lot. He has the versatility the Nets need on this team, because they're going to need a couple guys that can just be Swiss Army knives to some degree, because they have a lot of guys that they have are just kind of siloed in their skill sets. They even have like a couple guys who kind of just play point guard. They have basically one shooting guard, maybe, Cam Thomas. He might play a little point. They have a bunch of like sort of 3-and-D guys who can't create anything for themselves. And they have a couple centers, and then they have Trendon Watford, who can do a little of all those things, but none of them elite. So I love the idea of having more minutes for him. I think that he's kind of like one of these like different kind of NBA players that's hard to categorize early, but the more you let them play, you start to see it's like, hey, kind of good things happen when he's on the court. Maybe think like Kyle Anderson or something like that. It's like, doesn't pop off the page at you, but if we just get enough minutes, it turns out it's like, hey, we got a lot of Kyle Anderson minutes. Turns out like kind of a lot of good stuff happens when he's on the court. And I kind of think Watford's a similar archetype like that.
And it's interesting too, because you mentioned Zaire Williams before. And so if you start to think about this bench unit, and again, maybe Dorian Finney-Smith is more into that mix. We saw Jalen Wilson and the Cam Johnson, like how will they overlap one another? But you don't have to squint too hard and see like, okay, so the group of guys coming off the bench, and we even made mention of Shake Milton the other coming out of the preseason game, just because he looked bigger when you saw him on the court. And we've notably always mentioned how the Nets lack size. Well, Trendon Watford's 6'9". Zaire Williams is 6'9". Noah Clowney is on the bench there too, and he's going to have his, mixed in role. Now, the Nets aren't what you would call, bulk in terms of their roster. It's a lot of lean and mean dudes, but there's versatility in that. If we think that maybe Zaire Williams offers a little more defensive value and Trendon Watford offers some more of that offensive versatility, well, there's a nice complement there. And if you're thinking about, again, I've been saying this all off season, I don't care about the wins and losses, but I do care about the sample sizes. I do care about the combinations you can see. And when you start to talk about these players, as opposed to Ben Simmons, as opposed to Dorian Finney-Smith, well, now I'm talking about all the guys that are 23 or 24 years or younger, that when you fast forward a year from now and you wipe away everybody who's 28, 29, or 30 years old, now all of a sudden, whether these guys are all starters or all contributors off the bench, when the Nets flood in that rookie class, it would be nice to feel like we have 3, 4, and maybe, 3, 4. Can we squint and see 5 guys that represent this group? That's Jalen Wilson, Cam Thomas, Nic Claxton, Trendon Watford, maybe Zaire Williams. Like, okay, there's 5 guys. And I think that that's appealing to see how these guys can work together. My curiosity is going to be, and talk about it coming up here in a second, how does Jordi Fernandez approach the idea of veterans and young players, and maybe not siloing them into 2 separate groups when we look at these minutes early in the season? We'll continue that conversation to close things out coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, we're going to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. You're going to get a big return here this NFL season. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So much stuff going on over at FanDuel. I mean, obviously you can jump in right away if you want to just get on the Nets over under on their win totals, 18.5. You're not going to see a lower number than that. It's very rarely that you're going to be able to bet the under on an 18.5, like just in NBA history. So that just from a historical angle, you might want to just head over to FanDuel just for the chance to be able to tell your grandkids you did it. Not many teams are going to give you the chance to do that. FanDuel's got it slice and dice every single way you could think of. They got the over-unders, they got the totals, they got the player props. It's all there. Live in-game betting. You're able to see the play-by-play right there on the same page where you make your bets. You're also going to get a big return over on FanDuel. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place that first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, closing things out here on the Locked On Nets podcast, talking about the first preseason game, talking about the rotations and the expectations as we'll get a few more bodies healthy and back. Killian Hayes, we talked about him coming out of the game and not being available, obviously. You'd love to hear some real progress on how he is. Also listed as day-to-day at this point, but if he doesn't play, it just damages the sample size of how this backcourt looks, and seeing Shake Milton come in, seeing Keon Johnson come in, who we all like and fans are excited for, but you would like to have one more body in that room. When I say that this starting rotation would already have looked different if you had Nic Claxton, obviously, but because it was veteran heavy, do you think that Jordi Fernandez will approach this as, I want to make sure that all of my young talent has veterans to lean on, literally on the court? Or is it going to be about practice? Is it going to be about bench communication? And then saying sometimes the young squad is going to go out there and get big run and live and play through their mistakes and let the veterans look as good as possible, as we always keep an eye on that trade deadline horizon and saying, hey, these are experienced players. You're continuing to see how good they can be maybe on other teams.
Yeah, I think they're afforded a nice opportunity here between the mix of veterans and young players they have. They have to keep playing the vets because they have to try to trade them, right? Like, so these guys have to, except for maybe Simmons, they just have to be able to trade these guys, which means they have to get minutes. And again, just on a pure basketball level, these guys are better than most of the young guys they have. So it just, if you just are going sort of meritocracy on this, these guys should, like Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith should play, right? It's not just like you're not doing them any favors because they're veterans. They just are better basketball players than most other guys on the team. That's just the state of the game. Now, the part where they have the ability to play these guys together, I think they should take advantage while they can, like mixing and matching these lineups, because in theory, that's not going to last forever, right? These guys should get traded. The team's going to get a lot younger, almost for sure. Whoever they bring back in a trade is either going to probably just be younger or headed out the door, like buyout style. Like, we're not exactly sure. Like, that could definitely happen, right? Like, could be buyouts with whoever comes back, because those guys are headed off to, greener pastures with another team. Not Simmons isn't a buyout candidate as far as I'm concerned, but any other players they bring in through trades could be, depending on who it is. So I just think while they have the opportunity to do it, and you have guys who are sort of like classy professional veterans that they have, like Johnson, like DFS, that guys are really well respected around the game just for work ethic and intelligence and all this other stuff. That I think it makes sense to take advantage of it while you can. I don't think it should just be like veterans, young guys. They should be, and I don't think it's going to be like that. I think it's going to be a mix and match group. And I actually think that we will see a lot of evenings where there is kind of like a hot hand nature to the team too. Like, where it's just, hey, you're playing well, you're going to keep playing. And the minutes are going to get a little hard to figure out going in on a night-to-night basis, which could be frustrating, like from a projection standpoint. But from a, like, just strictly just like, these are our set rotations and we're just going to live and die by them, I don't think I can't imagine that's going to be the case. I think we're going to see lots of different combinations as they just kind of give lots of guys longer looks. And if you're playing well, you just stay in. I could see that happening a lot.
It's when we say like hot hand, obviously talk about like Cam Johnson or Jalen Wilson or even Dorian Finney-Smith, who like we saw at times could be totally on fire from the outside, and then also had like off nights. And it won't be hard to maybe, as the example, say, okay, Dorian Finney-Smith, you're struggling a little bit here. We're going to pull you out. We're going to get Noah Clowney in, and then we're going to think about Zaire Williams maybe getting a little bit more run over the back end of a game. It's also easy, the one of the last things I think is interesting is it's easy, one, to protect the veterans and not overrun them. I think you're going to see some very balanced minutes, no matter who ends up getting them. No one's going to be playing monster minutes at any point, maybe outside of like Cam Thomas, because he's going to kind of be lineup proof for the most part. But the other side is like from a rookie standpoint or a young player standpoint, you also have the benefit of saying you had a good run and we don't have to overexpose that. Like, I think Jordi Fernandez also gets the opportunity to say, you came in for 2 shifts in the first half. It looked really good, really clean. Let's put that in our pocket. And you'll be on the bench and the coaching staff will be talking to you about how it went well. And now we're going to go a little bit deeper in the bench and bring somebody else in and give them a look too, so that you don't spoil maybe some of them. This is purely for the young players, not the veterans, but so you don't spoil some of the positive growth. Like, I think there will be a nice box checking there that, to your point, we respect the veterans. And that's why you'll always get the opportunities to maybe eat a little bit more of the minutes, so we make sure our progression and our development of the young guys kind of stays on a timetable. And that's going to be, by the way, I'm going to be the first one that gets frustrated by it. If I see Noah Clowney, it only plays 15 minutes one night. It's going to bother me that I think he could be playing 25 and he's putting together pretty good performance. But We have 82 games, and we have everything after the trade deadline to see these guys expand and eat a lot of minutes when it gets down the stretch of this year.
Yeah, and I don't think he's really at risk of losing stuff too much. But I do know,
No.
I agree with you in
Yeah,
principle.
bad name example to drop, but
Yeah, but it makes sense because these are the guys that fans are worried about the most. These are the guys that fans want to see the most. They want to see, like, this is the future. We don't need to, like, I think the Nets fans are concerned a little bit by sort of the team dragging around what might be perceived to be dead weight a little bit, and I can understand that. And especially if the guys aren't going to be here with the team long, or they're a little long in the tooth, or just not any good anymore, like whatever it is. I can understand the fan base's sort of collective feeling of, like, sort of what's the point. But in general, I agree with you. And I also agree that what you said before, the risk of these veterans playing a lot, there's just really not a lot of minutes. These guys, I doubt anyone really, maybe except for Cam Thomas, averages more than 30 minutes. I'd be shocked really if anyone on the team averaged that many. I think he will probably, like 32, 33 would be my guess, something like that. And I wonder how much they're going to want to turn him loose to, like, if they think the scoring title is like actually a real thing. Like, I could see his minutes being up there, but after that, I'd be floored if anyone on this team played more than 30 minutes a game on a nightly basis. I just don't think they're going to run it that way. And that alone, like, if we rerun our minutes, which will do after preseason, after like one or two more games of preseason here, when we rerun the minutes, I'm not going to put a single guy over 30 except for Thomas. I don't think, right. And I just don't think that they're going to need to. I don't think any veterans going to want to go crazy with it, especially if they're trying to get traded somewhere. So I think it's just going to set up pretty well there.
Yeah, it's safeguards on both ends to not overextend the veterans, and then also leave the rookies in a spot where the only thing I will be interested to see, I will say, and we won't find out in preseason, this is something more to talk about as we get to the regular season, is will we ever come to a place where veteran X loses that starting job? If it looks like, on tape, the younger player is deserving of it, how long maybe will the coaching staff and will the organization hold off on that? Some players like Dorian Finney-Smith, not as big a deal. Maybe with somebody like Cam Johnson, you feel a little bit differently about that, and that obviously holds trade value implications as well. But guess what? Got some more preseason games to go before we get into the regular season, so plenty of time to continue sorting this stuff out, Dougie.
All right. Like I said, next preseason game is not till Monday evening against those Wizards, Clash of the Titans. Can't wait for that one. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe over on YouTube as well. We're going to get to 8,000. Again, Nets aren't going to hold up their end of the winning bargain this year, but we're going to do everything we can all season long, 5 days a week. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to Locked On Nets.
You can't help getting older, but you don't have to get old. Now that is George Burns.
R.I.P. One of the all-time great poets. We're back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.